The California legislature is confronting a wide variety of issues in 2015, including what to do about income inequality and job growth, public education, climate change, and the state's major infrastructure needs, particularly regarding transportation and water. And all of this is in the context of whether to save or spend the state's recent budget surplus. So what are the Republican and Democratic agendas for the 2015 legislative session? We'll ask the Senate's Democratic leader, Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon, and the Senate Republican leader, Bob Huff.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
We're coming to you from the State Capitol today, and unlike in years past, this year the state has is in the enviable position of having a budget surplus. The question is, how should it be spent? We're going to ask the leader of the California Senate, Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you, Mark.
So, how should the budget surplus be spent? Should we be dealing with these deep cuts in social services that they've experienced through the Great Recession, or should we be paying down the state's debts?
Well, a couple things. One is that we're in a much better place than we were a few years ago. We're leaving the worst economic recession since 1929. So obviously there's a lot more money in the coffers. It's a more robust year. That's a good thing. Two, the question is, what do we do? Do we use that money to pay down debt, or do we invest some of that money in human capital? Californians, everyday Californians throughout the state of California, but especially in the most impoverished, hardest hit areas. In parts of California, it's almost like the Gilded Age. The economy is off the charts. In other parts of the state of California, when you disaggregate the data, especially in Central Valley, from Fresno County all the way down to south to Kern County, it's like, this area never left the economic recession, the worst one since 1929. So I think that you take a moderate approach. I think it's a balanced approach. We continue to pay off our debt. We are targeted to actually eliminate our debt by 2018. But at the same time, I think you have to invest in human capital, because at the end of the day, it's humans that make this economy move.
When you say targeting to take care of our debt by 2018, what debt are you speaking about?
We're talking about the structural debt. We're talking about structural debt right now. We've cut it in half, almost about $18 billion. If we're projected by 2018, if in fact the economy continues to grow, and if we stay strict in terms of our payments, which there's no reason why we're not going to do that, we can eliminate that debt.
It's interesting, when we talked to Mac Taylor, the legislative analyst, a few years ago, he was talking about $20 billion deficits as far as the eye can see, and now we're talking surpluses. So things have changed for the better, for sure. I just want to follow up on that, your comment about poverty and the difference between the coastal areas and the inland areas of California. There really is a difference.
There is.
Are there any specific things you think we can or should be done by the state to deal with, help those struggling areas?
Well, a couple things. One is that we just surpassed Russia as well as Italy, and we just recently surpassed Brazil. We're the 7th largest GDP in the entire world. We have the 7th largest economy in the entire world. That speaks to the resiliency of who we are as a state, coming off the worst economic recession since 1929. However, let me underscore that in areas such as the Central Valley, Inland Empire, and pockets, even within the coastal areas and big urban cities, a lot of folks haven't felt the economic resurgence. So an area like Central Valley, Fresno, Tulare, Orosi, Kern County, Madera, these areas need a strategic economic plan for economic growth. We just the other day presented our Senate plan, the Senate Democratic plan for energy efficiency, and for technologies to spurn real economic growth. I think that we should really focus on the Central Valley and create a new economy of tomorrow.
So you think that the Valley will benefit from green jobs?
No doubt about it. I'll tell you one thing right now. The Valley has two things that are not good. It has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state of California. It has some of the worst air quality in the state of California, in the country. So if we can deal with the smog that our children, the children of the Central Valley, breathe into their lungs, which causes billions of dollars to be spent in public health, hospitalization, and we can actually put people to work, middle class, working class folks, and lift them into the middle class, it would be a big boom for Central Valley. We're talking about installation and manufacturing of solar panels. We're talking about energy efficiency. We're talking about jobs that can't be outsourced
You're talking about retrofitting buildings for energy
Retrofitting
efficiency?
buildings,
Okay.
upgrades, window fenestration, double pane windows, insulation, HVAC systems. These are jobs that can be outsourced to other states or offshore to China or elsewhere. They have to be done on site.
You know, one of the things, though, when you talk about unemployment in regions like the San Joaquin Valley, they say, you know, it's not a question that jobs don't exist there. It's that we don't have an educated workforce to fill those jobs. So education, as you know, it's pretty much an automatic pilot, how the funding occurs. And I'm just wondering, I'm curious about your perspective on this kind of ballot box budgeting, when the legislature doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver in terms of K through 12 spending because Prop 98 and other things tell the legislature how to spend the money.
Well, I mean, that has been a frustration, I think, of a lot of legislators. You know, the voters have spoken years ago. Prop 98 is a very important initiative, no doubt about it. I think we must invest heavily in public schools, K through 12, as well as our community colleges. However, I will say that at times it becomes a little difficult, a little frustrating, because the number of resources that you have that are actually on the table are finite. It's not a large amount of money, even though folks talk about $168 billion general fund budget. The vast majority is on autopilot because of ballot initiatives voted in by the voters. So when there is more money, more revenue in our general fund, a lot of it automatic pilot, because the formula is already established constitutionally, go to certain segments of the budget. So that means you have a finite amount of money to actually be creative and innovative with.
And that's happening this year. I mean, a lot of the surplus is going to be directed toward K through 12, which
is a good thing.
Probably going to benefit a lot of people,
know.
get a more educated workforce.
But we need a little more balanced approach.
Let me ask you about this. We've got about 30 seconds left in the segment, but I want to ask you about college-educated students. I mean, there are studies that show that right now California is going to be about 1 million workers short in terms of college educated. And now in addition, we're talking about, is UC and CSU, are they getting enough money? They're talking about tuition increases. Is that going to make education even more difficult, college education even more difficult for folks?
Well, I'll tell you one thing right now. At our rate, it's going to make accessibility and affordability for kids who work hard to get into college and stay in college very, very difficult. We're projected 10 years out from now, in 2025, to have 1 million less bachelor degrees. That's going to impact our economy in California. We have to do everything possible to make sure we allow kids to have accessibility to higher education and affordability, and we can get them to graduate on time.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to hear the Republican position on the state budget. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report.
Welcome back. So what do the Republicans think should be done with the state budget surplus? Our guest is the California State Senate Republican leader, Bob Huff. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Great to be with you.
So the state's currently running a slight surplus. Should that money be spent on restoring social service cuts, or should it be spent on paying down the state's long-term debts?
Well, I think it probably won't surprise you that I think it ought to be used for paying down debts. Certainly, we have a very highs and lows kind of budget. Right now, we have a so-called temporary tax in place that's pumping up $7-8 billion a year. So to the degree that we have extra money right now, we should be paying down our debts so that when those monies are not available, that our overhead, our debt service is not as high, and we'll be able to move forward a little easier.
Well, I guess that's the question. Is that going to be a temporary tax, or are they going to re-up it?
I have to take comfort in what the governor has said. He referenced it in his State of the State or in his budget. He's mentioned, and I listened very carefully, temporary several times, and it's my understanding he's not going to support an extension. But there's certainly an appetite by the Democrat leaders to extend that.
Yeah. You know, the state is almost divided economically between the wealthy coast and the poor inland areas. What do you think can or should be done to kind of rectify that situation, that disparity in poverty between the two regions?
Well, it's complicated. I mean, that's a big issue. But a lot of it has to do, it's more expensive to live in the coast, and so you tend to have more affluent people that go there, and they tend to get better education. There's a lot of things that goes into it. I think the real solution is to beef up our educational system so that we have more people, first of all, graduating from high school. We need to have more career technical education so that those that don't want to take the academic path still have a way to earn a decent income. We need to do some things to bring back manufacturing and other jobs to the state so you have more than just a have and have not, but we can grow that middle class. And if we can actually get kids graduated from college in degrees that are meaningful, or graduated out of high school or community college with skills that can put food on the table, I think you'll have less disparity than what we're seeing right now.
You know, you mentioned manufacturing jobs. That's always been a struggle, it seems like, at least recently for California. Any prescription on how we could bring manufacturing jobs back to the state?
We have systematically gone after so-called green jobs. That looks a lot like a plumber and electrician and other things that we call different things in the past, but The reality is you can't continue to go after a green economy on the backs of the average person. We are paying 50% more for residential electricity rates than neighboring states. Industrial, it's 84% higher. So, manufacturing jobs are going to go elsewhere. We've had it nationally, we're seeing more manufacturing coming back from overseas, 6%, 6.5% growth nationwide. California has less than 1% growth. Or 1% of that amount. So we're not getting our fair share. A lot of it has to do with the cost of doing business in California.
You were mentioning about the importance of education. K through 12 education takes up the lion's share of the state budget, but a lot of it is on automatic pilot. And I'm just wondering, do you think that the funding mechanisms have had their intended effect of providing, well, certainly they're providing more money, but is it improving education in California?
The short term is no, because just giving more money to education without looking for quality improvements, without having deliverables, what are you going to get for the money? You're paying more money for the same result you had before. I mean, an interesting data set that I was looking at recently is that we've increased our education funding after factoring in inflation since, I believe the base period is 1990, by like $34 billion. And not only has our grades been flatlined or our educational quality, we actually lost in verbal and in math, which, we're going the other direction and we're putting more money into the system.
I'm just wondering what your feeling is about this local control funding formula.
I supported it. It's a way to put more control in the local school districts so they can make their own decisions, and it also goes to more high poverty schools. But there again, if you're just going to beef up people's salaries, that doesn't change the outcome. We have to have more robust education reform coupled with the revenue, and then I believe you'll see some change.
Okay, well, let's turn our attention to college, higher education. A lot of talk about California is going to be 1 million workers short in the next 10 years of the workers that it needs with a college education to be competitive in a global economy. Where do Republicans stand on this debate between more funding or higher tuitions at the UC and CSU systems?
Well, I'm a fan of higher education. I'm a fan of education. I think we have to have a skilled and educated workforce. How you get there, I guess that's $1 million question. If you start looking at some other college and state universities in other states, ours is actually a bargain. But having said that, I believe over $1 trillion, I think it's $1.3 trillion nationwide that our students have in debt from going to school, and then they can't even find a decent job, many of them when they get out. That's a travesty. So we got to do something to lower the cost of education in California for California residents. And that's complicated, and it's fraught with landmines trying to get there. But I think we owe that to our kids. I think society benefits with an educated workforce.
Okay. Well, up next, what is the Democratic position on some of the big issues confronting California? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report.
Welcome. So what are some of the big issues facing the California legislature this session? We're rejoined by the leader of the California Senate, Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon. So one of the big problems in the minds of many is climate change. What's being proposed this legislative session to address that problem?
Well, thank you for asking a question, because it's one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now as a state, as a country, as a planet. The Senate introduced their climate package not too long ago, and it is a very thoughtful, very far-reaching climate package with two goals in mind. One, create jobs, economic growth. We have to put people to work in California. We have to begin a new economy. Is absolutely essential, especially in the hardest hit areas in California. That's Inland Empire. That's the whole Central Valley. And two, we want to clean up the pollution that our children breathe into their lungs. Obviously, that has a major impact on health outcomes for young children, and also it costs billions of dollars. So, create jobs to put people to work, and also to clean up the environment.
So some specific examples. One thing I think you're talking about is 50% increase in energy efficiency of existing buildings.
That's correct.
Retrofitting. You're talking about increasing the amount of electricity coming from renewable sources from 33% to 50%.
From the utilities.
Now, when you say that, though, you say renewable sources. Do you include hydro in that, or
no? Well,
nuclear?
we include solar. We include wind, we include geothermal, we include renewable sources. Other options, other energy options, say for example, nuclear, hydro dams, natural gas. Well, we want to make sure we can clean up the environment and put people to work here in California. Our bottom line is this. So we're going to work not in an adversarial position with folks. We're going to work in a very open fashion. However, the bottom line is for us, the Senate Democrats, is you got to create jobs for Californians, especially in the hardest hit areas throughout the state of California, and you have to clean up the environment. Everything else is negotiable.
Okay, that's as a negotiator, I like that. Everything's negotiable. So scientists are reporting that one of the consequences of climate change are these severe weather patterns. One of them is
extreme
droughts.
weather.
Extreme weather, droughts. So we've got California has been in a drought for a while now. It seems to be getting worse, not better. Should we start talking about mandatory water restrictions?
Well, I don't think we go there yet, but obviously we just passed a water bond, this past year with a bipartisan manner, Republicans, Democrats, the governor. It was a wonderful accomplishment of folks coming together. But we got to realize is that the scarcity of water, the drought that we're suffering throughout the state of California, but especially in the hardest hit areas throughout the Central Valley and Inland Empire, is brought by climate change. The snowpack is not as deep as in years previous, and we have less water. When you have less water, you have more unemployment. When you have more unemployment, you have folks who are on unemployment insurance, taxing businesses, agribusiness. We've got to deal with this issue of emissions of carbon and do so in a manner that's thoughtful, intelligent, so we can create jobs that are economically beneficial to the hardest hit areas in California.
And plan for the future, right? Because the weather patterns are changing,
exactly.
And so we want to be able to plan for that. I want to ask you about another kind of issue that people think impacts greenhouse gases, at least some have argued, and that is high-speed rail. What are your thoughts on high-speed rail and its impact as a solution for dealing with greenhouse gases?
Well, listen, I support high-speed rail. Once high-speed rail is up and running through the Central Valley from Los Angeles to the Bay Area, it'll move people quickly. It'll get people out of their cars so they're not emitting, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and creating smog, ozone. It'll put people to work, undoubtedly. So we're the only industrial nation in the entire world that doesn't have a high-speed rail. Japan, Korea, France, Spain. These are a few countries, that have a high-speed rail. China, we don't. It's time that we have it. Put people to work. Hard hats, dig in deep into our ground, and lay down the track. And once we do so, we're going to start, lowering our greenhouse gases because folks are going to start using this type of transportation.
Let me ask you about roads. A similar product issue, transportation. $59 billion in deferred maintenance on roads. Assembly Speaker Atkins is talking about a road usage fee of about $52 a year, about $1 a week, and that would add $2 billion a year to improve roads. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
Well, I agree entirely with Speaker Tony Atkins. I commend her for moving forward her proposal. The reality is we have billions upon billions of dollars of deferred maintenance. We have some of the worst roads in the state of California. We have bridges that are currently dilapidated. They may be unsafe. We don't want horrific tragedies taking place. But the reality is this: we don't have the resources to bring about better roads, safer conditions for Californians. So we have to be thoughtful in how we move forward these proposed policies. But I wholeheartedly support Speaker Tony Atkins.
One of the issues that you hear a lot in California is this very volatile tax system that we have. I mean, you're talking about worrying about revenues, and it seems that California really is overly reliant on the financial fortunes of the wealthiest people.
Yeah.
What should we be looking at? Maybe a change in how the taxes are collected in California?
I think that we have some proposals coming in from within the Senate. Senator Hertzberg, for example, has moved forward ideas for tax reform proposals. I think everything should be on the table, and we should assess each measure. The reality is this: is that because our over-reliance on the wealthiest of Californians, when they do well, capital gains, taxes, then we do well. But when they don't do well, the reality is that we don't do well, and we're at the whims of the very volatile gyrations of the world global markets.
And just when the market's not doing well, that's when you need the money in the state to deal with those problems, and you don't have it because it's not coming in.
And that's when we have the budget deficits, and that's when we have to start making cuts.
Let me ask this last question. I'm sorry, I've only got about 30 seconds left in the segment. I want to ask you about really voter apathy. Only 30% of eligible Californians cast ballots in the last election, placing California in the bottom 20% of all states. What can we do to get more people politically engaged?
Well, on the Senate side, Senator Ben Allen who's the chair of Elections Committee, is going to hold oversight hearings up and down the state of California. This voter apathy is not good for California. It's not good for civic participation. It's not good for democracy. It's not good that a handful of folks, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your political party, actually influence the political outcomes. We need all folks to participate in this process, but we got to figure out how we can actually engage folks civically, motivate, inspire them to get out and vote. First and foremost, it's your duty to vote. You got to that's your responsibility. But I think we can do a lot better to motivate folks to get out and vote.
Well, I want to thank Senate Pro Tem Kevin
Thank
DeLeon
you.
for joining us. Up next, what is the Republican position on these issues? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report.
We're rejoined by California Senate Republican leader Bob Huff. I wanted to get your perspective on some of the issues that the legislature is going to be debating this session. You know, the Democrats are talking about a package of legislation to address climate change. So the first question is climate change real?
Well, a lot of people have different ideas on that. I think our world's history is replete with evidence of climate change. So the real question is it human-induced or not?
Okay.
California has 1%. So let's just assume, for sake of argument right now, that it is human-induced. I don't particularly buy into that, but I'll go for the sake of argument. If it is, and we're 1% of the world's greenhouse gases, how do we shoulder that burden ourselves? Now, you can make an argument that somebody's got to lead. Well, we've been leading for a long time. We've been leading with our chin, and we're getting whacked. As I've said before, we have manufacturing jobs returning here, but because our cost of electricity is so high, and that's driven partly by our renewable portfolio standards, solar and wind is expensive. It's cheaper than it used to be, but it's very expensive. We're not competitive. We also do some pretty interesting scoring. We don't chart large hydro or nuclear. I was on a trip to France one time with former Speaker Fabian Nunez, and he was just ecstatic that they had 92% renewable. I said, well, Fabian, come on, they got 85% nuclear, they got 7% hydro, and by the way, you won't count either of those in California standards.
Do you think that's going to change? Do you think that in a Democratic package they'll say, listen, okay, hydro really is a renewable resource?
Well, they should, but they're going to have a lot of forces not to, because with hydro, the environmentalists don't want to flood more riparian habitat. And so in a perverse way, you're encouraging more hydro if you're going to score it. And that's why they didn't score it in the first place. They'll allow small hydro, but even in some cases, we looked at a project up in Canada where they have run of the river, and it's not damming it. Fish can migrate, no problems like that. We still won't score that.
Let's stay on the issue of water. California has been experiencing a drought, as you know. What are your thoughts about some of the short-term solutions? I know some of the long-term solutions might be above-ground storage or below-ground storage, but what are the short-term solutions?
More rain.
Can you do that?
Well,
you have more power than I realized.
I tried this new dance that Edmund works so effect. Well, we did a couple of inches last week, but no, I mean, short term, you have to obviously manage it, and if it continues, we're going to have some rationing. Nobody wants to hear that word, but if you have a limited supply, and I know it's critical for the valley. I mean, I grew up on a farm down in the Imperial Valley. We ordered our water from the Colorado River, and there's a lot of water behind those dams up there, but it's more complex, and the whole state's plumbed together now. But we've got to make sure we have water for people and for critical crops. I mean, you can't not put water on an orchard before you're taking out thousands and thousands of dollars investment and screwing up the future.
Let me transition a little bit to infrastructure. There's $59 billion in deferred maintenance on roads. Assembly Speaker Atkins is talking about this road usage fee would be $1 a week or $52 a year. What is the Republican position on that issue?
I think first of all, we have to recognize we have a problem. So I was glad to hear the governor talk about he wants a bipartisan solution to the infrastructure. Speaker Atkins has put out her proposal. We agree with some of it. I think the best thing that we could say is we should be taking the roadway fees that have been diverted. That's almost $1 billion a year that can be going into it. We should be taking a look at those 3,500 employees at Caltrans that are generating, they're sucking $500 million out of our road dollars a year, and they're not doing anything right now or not doing anything productive. They're doing pie-in-the-sky type stuff down the road if there's ever funding, and there won't
Did the
be.
LEO have a report on that?
Yeah, the LEO had a report on it. So right there, you could rechannel a lot of money that's already in the system to fixing our roads. But I think long-term, we have to figure out how we have these zero-emission vehicles, the electric vehicles. They're not paying anything right now because we get it out of fuel tax. Well, they're not taxed. They don't have fuel, so they're not taxed. So we do have to figure that out. Is that a buck a week fee like the speaker's talking about? I don't know. It's going to be an interesting discussion, but we got to figure this out because we're underfunding our infrastructure.
Well, the usage fee also impacts rural areas because they drive more.
Yeah.
So that has to kind of be calculated into the equation as well. So we've got California with, you deal with this every day, short and long-term needs. We have a notoriously volatile tax system that relies heavily on the wealthiest citizens. So what do Republicans think should be done to better address the state's expenses while still decreasing the volatility of tax revenue? Big question.
In 30 seconds,
In 30,
right?
yeah, 30 seconds, go.
It's a real challenge.
I'll give you a full minute because this is a big question.
Oh, thank you. No, it's a huge issue because right now the top 1% are paying 54% of our personal income tax, and that's unsupportable. I've often said there's nothing more portable.
I'd like you to repeat that statistic if you would.
The top 1% of income taxpayers are paying 54% of the burden.
Right. Now, that's not the only tax. There's sales tax, there's corporate tax, there's other taxes.
A lot of other taxes.
But the primary source of revenue is income tax.
Correct. And so the top 1% are shouldering a huge amount. We all want to tax the guy that's not us, and the guy behind the tree, how that whole thing goes. But those guys are portable. They can build a house, across the line in
Nevada.
In Nevada. Down south, it's in Las Vegas. Up here, it's Incline Village or somewhere, like that. But nevertheless, they've got several houses anyway. It's no big deal. We can telecommute. We can do a lot of things. But you lose one billionaire, you're losing a lot of revenue in California. So we got to figure that out. But it does need to be flatter. I don't know what that looks like. We've floated a lot of ideas out over the years that get shot down. But it's certainly a discussion we have to figure out. It's going to be a bipartisan discussion. It's very complex. And probably at some point it's got to go on the ballot. I don't know how it gets done legislatively, unless it's incremental. We do a little bit here and a little bit there.
I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to answer another big question. The voter turnout in the last election was embarrassingly low, 30%. In fact, I read a statistic somewhere that there were more 19-year-olds arrested than voted. Incredible statistic. What can be done to get more people engaged in the political process?
Well, we should quit messing around with the political process, because part of that result, I think, is when the legislature gamed the system previously to put all the initiatives on the November ballot, because there's more turnout. Now there's less reason people come to the June ballot. And so we perversely have affected our own outcome by trying to game the system to get something passed that was noble. And without any big issues, there's not a lot of money spent, there wasn't a lot of challenge. And I think, so that's part of it. The other is we need a more robust two-party system, or 3 or 4, but you have to have debate. If there's no dialogue in the marketplace with no interesting exchange of ideas, people are bored.
Well, the Democrats no longer have their supermajority, so maybe we're moving in that direction. I want to thank Republican leader Bob Huff, as well as the Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon, leader of the Democrats. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging onto our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.